Hi there.
Do we both have it?
Hi there, guys.
Hello.
How's everybody?
I can't see the hat. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Good morning. I'm gonna eat my breakfast still because I just got done cooking it. But I did send the messages out to everybody this morning, so we'll see what happens.
Great.
So, how's everyone this morning? Avichai is driving. Where is he off to today? You going to school, Avichai? Yeah, you going to school? Okay. Hi, Kelly. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. 210 number. Is that Bashava? I mean, Bacha.
Ashton,
Good morning.
Good morning.
how exciting.
All right.
Okay.
How's everybody today? Oh, that's definitely good, yeah.
Sounds good. Don't all speak at once.
All right. All right. Let's see here. Yeah. Parenting skills 101. We get to learn right now. Kids can be something though, can't they?
That's good. All right, guys, let's get going. We've got an important lesson to do today, so I'm going to try to cover it. It's lesson class number 10 from the book, and this lesson is all about lashon hara, which we'll discuss what that is in a second. So before we go around, just say hi to everybody. So hi, Kelly. Thanks so
Hi,
much
how are
for
you?
how you
Hi, nice to
keeping.
see you.
Good to
Oh,
see you.
well, yeah, good.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. And then
Thank
Avichai.
He's got to unmute himself. He's driving, but okay.
Okay.
Shalom, boker tov לכולם.
Just don't drink and drive. Remember the tip.
No. I'll give you a pulse ache. You can drink and drive. It's perfectly okay.
Rather smoke
That's
and
what it
fly.
is.
Rather smoke and fly. That's what they say. And Roxana, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah,
Good.
thank
Good
God. Oh,
morning,
good.
everybody.
Thanks so much for coming. And Ashton. Ashton
Shalom,
Dwayne.
Shalom.
Oh, I can hear you. Hallelujah. Good to see you.
Dwayne, you got to dance now because your mic works.
Yeah.
Don't praise the Lord.
All right, and Kay Bracha, how you doing? Thanks so much for coming.
Wait, okay, I'm on mute
There
now.
you
Shabbat
go.
Tov, hello.
Good to see you.
Ah,
Good. Thanks so much for coming. And
it's not working today. This is amazing.
Donna.
Yeah. Hello. I
Oh,
have
you
a
made it. So, thanks for
I
coming.
have a company. That's why I'm late.
Okay. Don't worry, I was late as well.
Yeah.
He's always late.
Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming.
Okay.
And then we have Hannah. Are you there?
We have a couple of hymns on.
Hannah.
Hannah. Hi. We can't see you. Are you hiding?
I was, yes.
Okay. Oh, there you go. I think you're in a storm cloud. There we go. Now I can see you. Good. All right. And we have another Hannah who.
It's my mobile phone. Sorry, I was
Oh, okay.
struggling to join in. I'll hang up in a moment.
Okay. No problem. Thanks for coming. And
Okay.
okay, Chrissy.
In bed with bronchitis, and my mother is here. Here, she's going to say hi.
Okay.
Shalom. I'm here with a severe sinus infection also, so we ask for prayer, and there's another situation going on. I'm not going to mention what it is. Hashem knows, and we just ask for prayer for that.
Please God, it will be good. You should get well.
Amen.
The merit of the class, the studying, everything should work out well for you and everything. If there's anything I can do, also let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Ruth, okay, so you can text just saying hi. Okay, and Bakia.
I think you may have said hi to me earlier, but I was on the other side of the room with a really loud refrigerator and a child, so I couldn't come to the phone.
Thanks for
But I
coming.
just wanted... Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Ruth, Alexander
Okay,
also
Ruth.
says hi to everybody as well.
Okay, so Ruth. Good. All right, guys. Okay, so I'm gonna meet you all, and we're gonna get started with today's lesson. So today we're gonna cover a topic called lashon hara, okay, which literally translates into bad speech or evil tongue. And I will start off with an interesting story, and I actually saw the story today. So the story goes with the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov was known to be quite a mystic, and he had some of his students, and he said to his students, I had a vision that we should take a trip somewhere, I don't know where it is, follow me on the trip, and we have a lesson. Hashem wants to give us a message. So the students follow the Baal Shem Tov, they walk outside, and they see a carriage that's waiting to go. And they ask the carriage driver, where are you going? And the carriage driver gives them a name of a town. They don't even know where that town is. And the Baal Shem Tov says, come on, and this is the carriage we have to take. This is for us to learn. So the Baal Shem Tov hops onto the carriage together with all his students, and they make their way, and they start traveling. And it's a couple of hours into the journey. And the students say to the Baal Shem Tov, can we stop for a little bit, have something to eat, have a bit of a rest? And the Baal Shem Tov says, sure, no problem. And they get out and they walk into an inn. And in this little hotel, they sit down, and they say it's a kosher establishment. So they ask the owner, and what do you have to eat here? So he gives them a menu of the different things they have to eat. And one of the things that they appealed to them was a meat dish. So the students of the Baal Shem Tov go and they call the slaughterer in those days. So each town would have its own slaughterer at the shochet, and they called him in, And they started asking him all questions to make sure that the meat is kosher. They asked him, what sort of knife do you use? This law about slaughtering, that law, this. And they interrogated him for, for, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, asking him every single question which they could. And eventually they established, and they said, fine, the meat's kosher, we're gonna eat it. And just before they're about to eat it, some voice pops up from the background. The little old man pops up his head and he says, are you as careful with what comes out your mouth as what goes in your mouth? Right? And with that, the students realized that was the lesson that they were there to learn. That we often, applies to all of us, we can often be very meticulous and careful in many other commandments and many other details, especially when it comes to like kosher, making sure that we don't put something forbidden in our mouths. But sometimes the reverse, what comes out of our mouth, that needs more attention, and that's something which we have to always be on vigil for in God. So this is a lesson which we're going to learn about. What does the Torah allow? What are we allowed to speak about? What are we allowed to say? And what is forbidden? So there's the concept goes like this. That says that Hashem created the world. It says, "Ba'asara ma'amaras nivra olam." Hashem created the world with the power of speech, and us as human beings, we have the power through our speech to create. We have the power to build, and we have the power to destroy. And speech is a very, very important concept. There's a concept, kabbalistically speaking, which says that any organ or part of the body where there's only one of them has higher significance than organs where there's two. So, for example, the mouth is more powerful than, let's say, the lungs, where there's two sides, two lobes, is more powerful than the kidneys, where there's two of them, and the heart, where there's only one, that is more powerful. So the concept is that the mouth, which is the center of the body, has a very powerful ability. And there's a verse which says, "Hachayim v'amaves biyad halashon," which translates into "Hachayim v'amaves," life and death is in the hand of speech, which means that a person, you can bring someone to life, you can empower someone and motivate someone, invigorate them through what you say. And the opposite is also true. You can run someone down and break them and smash them to bits, also using your mouth with what you say. Now, it's important to know the power of speech, that you can lift someone up or you can break them with what you say. So that's something which we're going to look at in just a moment. Now, when it comes to the topic of Lashon Hara, so we need to mention a very important figure, that of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kahagan, who was known as the Chafetz Chaim. Some of you may have heard of him. And the Chafetz Chaim wasn't his name, but he became known as the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kahagan. And he was born in 1838. He died in 1936, so he lived quite a lengthy life. And he was known to be what we call a Gadol Hadar, which is basically a leader of the generation, undisputed leader, surpassed head and shoulders above all those around him in his time. And apart from being exceptionally learned and very knowledgeable, what made him stick out more than anything else was his attribute of piety. He was an exceptionally pious individual, and he was known for his huge humility. He had humility beyond anything else. And in fact, he shunned any sort of publicity. He shunned having any honor. He wanted to always be treated almost like a regular person. And the first book which he published, he didn't write his name. Normally a person would write their name when they author a book. The Chafetz Chaim did not write his name. He published it sort of anonymously and by the title of Chafetz Chaim. And it was based on the verse which we say in Psalms. It says, "Mia isha Chafetz Chaim," who is the man who wants life? Oyev Yomim, who loves days, liros tov, to see good. Is Nesar l'shoncha meira, guard your mouth from speaking bad. Usvasecha, and your lips, midaber mimma, and your lips from speaking deceitfully. Right? And that's where the title of his book came from, is Mia Isha Chafetz Chaim, who is the man who wants life. And what his book was basically a work which was trying to describe and discuss the laws about negative speech, about what we are not allowed to say, and the consequences and the severity of speaking Lashon Hara. And he didn't publish it with his own name. He just called the book Chafetz Chaim, and it became today a kind of a staple amongst, in the Jewish world. Everyone's heard of the book Chafetz Chaim, and it's all the laws of Lashon Hara. Later on, he published the second follow-up to that, which is also often today sold together as one volume, called Shmiras Halashon. And Shmiras Halashon is also further laws about when it is permissible to speak. And I want to have discussed it a little bit in a moment, when we are allowed to say things and what we are allowed to say. So just so you know, the Torah does put certain restrictions, just like there's restrictions of what can come into our mouth, there's certain restrictions as to what can go out. Now, just to give a bit of an insight to who the Chafetz Chaim was, so the Chafetz Chaim, right, at the age when he was a young boy, so he lived in the town of Radin, right? It was a small shtetl, small like community village, and one of the call it the lower menial task, a job which existed in that town, but there was no running water in the town of Radin, and they used to have a water carrier, right? And the water carrier used to fill up buckets of water, and every morning he would make his rounds from house to house, delivering water to the residents. Now, the boys of the Chafetz Chaim's age, what they used to do, they wanted to play a practical joke. So what did they do? They would take during the winter months, right, the river would freeze over and it would get really cold. So the water carrier would take his buckets late at night to the river. So he wouldn't have to carry it so early in the morning. And with the idea that he'll fill it up and then be able to return it first thing. And the boys, what they would do is they would fill up his buckets after he had left and hope for them to freeze over. And the water carrier would then come in the morning and find buckets of frozen water, and they'll have to chisel out the water, chisel out the ice before he could even get started. And that was their practical joke, And the Chafetz Chaim, without anyone knowing, would go after the boys had already set up the bucket, filled them with water, and he would empty out all the buckets. And the water carrier was none the wiser. He never knew that this practical joke was being played on him. The boys thought that their trick had worked, and the Chafetz Chaim unassumingly kind of fixed the situation. That was kind of the nature of the piety of the Chafetz Chaim. He didn't look for attention. He just saw when something was wrong or something was bad, he would immediately run and try and remedy the situation. He was very sensitive to the feeling of others, to know that water carrier, what kind of a burden he would have to go through. And he was just sensitive in that nature to go and pick it up. There's another story of the Chafetz Chaim that for a living, so he actually was quite a poor individual, and he was orphaned at a very young age. And one of the ways how he made a living is he had a shop. It was like a convenience store. And in this convenience store, the Chafetz Chaim was very meticulous not to overcharge. And because of that, his prices were exceptionally cheap. And he outdid all his competitors. And everyone in the town of Radin wanted to come and shop with the Chafetz Chaim because that was the best place to get the good deal. And the Chafetz Chaim decided that he can't have his store open the whole day because he wants to leave some room for other people to have business. So what he did was he closed his store part-time to allow other people to supply goods. And when he saw that people waited specifically for his hours, so what he did was he saw it's not going to work. So he closed off the front entrance and he allowed the shop only to be open through the back entrance. But people soon figured out that the back entrance was how you get in. And eventually the Chafetz Chaim was forced to close down the shop. He was so sensitive that he shouldn't take any business away from another person. So this shows you the characteristics of who he was. With that shop incident, there was a very famous story that one of the things he would sell was salt. And he realized one market day that in the salt, they would weigh it up on a scale, and the scale had to get washed from time to time. And the container was sometimes moist. And there was salt which was left inside. And he realized that there was a small amount of salt that gets left behind every time he measures up salt. So he figured that he's been cheating his customers out of a few grains of salt. So what he did was he put together little packages of salt, and for I don't know how many days it was, every single customer that he had, he gave with them a little package of salt in case they had been undersold or overpaid for those few grams. So I think the Chafetz Chaim, that was his what he was known for, his extreme piety. And one last story, I think it's also quite famous. The Chafetz Chaim was once robbed. A robber came into his house, and he didn't have many possessions. They say that in his house, he owned, I think, a table and a chair and a couple of books, and very few possessions. And one of the things he did have was silver candlesticks for Shabbos. And the robber broke into his house and stole the silver candlesticks. And the Chafetz Chaim chased after the robber. And instead of trying to catch him and apprehend him, the Chafetz Chaim was screaming out. He said, "Macholach, macholach," which means "I forgive you, I forgive you." And he said that he didn't want the robber to have a sin on his hands. So he ran after the robber to say, "I forgive you. I don't want you. No, it's yours. You can keep it. I don't want you to be caught up with the sin of stealing." Now, so that's the greatness, and he was exceptionally pious, very, very sensitive to the feelings and understanding. And apart from that, he's written a huge number of books which are still to today widely used and almost mainstream. It's kind of the bread and butter of learning that there's the Chafetz Chaim, there's Shmer Salashin, there's Mishnah Brura, and Machane Yisrael. There's quite a number. He wrote a phenomenal amount in his lifetime. Now, so the Chafetz Chaim describes in his book Shmer Salashin that there are essentially three different kinds of speech which a person is not allowed to say. There's three different categories of things which are forbidden from the Torah. And there's actually, I think in total, there's 17 negative commandments, 14 positive commandments, and 3 curses for anyone who says or speaks or transgresses this. So it's quite serious. And that's what a person needs to guard, and we'll discuss in a moment how you can protect yourself from it. So the first category is what we call Lashon Hara, which literally means a bad tongue. Now, what that is, Lashon Hara is speaking something which is true. And this is quite important because in legal definitions, I know here in South Africa at least, a person who speaks something which is true can't be charged for defamation or libel and slander. If it's true, it already falls into a different category. Now, in halacha, speaking Lashon Hara is specifically if it is true. Now, if something is true, and you say it's a negative thing which you say which is true about somebody, you're not allowed to say that. So, for example, let's say I have a friend or someone invites me over, and they're a photographer, and they show me a bunch of pictures that they've taken. And I look through the pictures, and I see, each one's a blurry, horrible picture, out of focus. They're terrible. Each picture is worse than the next. Now, I then, another friend of mine comes, they call him Bob, and he says, I've hired, this photographer is going to be at my wedding. What do you think is a good idea? Am I allowed to say, listen here, Bob, and I've just looked through those pictures that Barbara has taken, and she's a terrible photographer. Now, it's true. Right? It's a true thing to say. Am I allowed to say that Barbara is a terrible photographer? And Adam, he's going to be hiring Barbara at the wedding. Am I allowed to say that or not? Okay, so strictly speaking, right, although it's true, I'm not allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to relate true information which is negative about somebody else. So although I know something negative about somebody, I'm not allowed to relate that negative information, despite it being true, to another person. And there are exceptions to that. But for the general rule is that's what Lashon Hara is. I cannot say something negative, derogatory about someone. And I'll discuss in a second the consequences that can happen. Now, so for example, in the case with Barbara, the photographer, so she's going to directly lose out of business, right? She's now, because I've spoken to Adam's not going to hire her, and now Barbara will lose money because of the action which I did. So that's lashon hara, and strictly speaking, it's forbidden. The next category of something which is forbidden is something which is called rechilus. Now, rechilus is comes from the word rachil, and there's a verse in the Torah which says, "Lo selech rachil," do not go as a peddler, right? Literally like a door-to-door salesman. And that sometimes you find where you're not speaking directly about the negative qualities to someone, but you're speaking about a third person. So, for example, you may have heard this, and this may have occurred to you, where someone will say to you, "Do you know what so and so is saying about you?" And that they're kind of relating information, negative information, about a third party. Now, so you may have, I don't know, for example, a relative or a friend, right? An uncle, an aunt, a brother, sister, a cousin who said, "You know that this relative of yours, they're very upset with you because you've done X, Y, and Z," right? And they're passing on third-hand information. So they kind of getting in between, and they try to work you up to dislike another third person. That's called rechilus, right? And that is forbidden as well. So it's forbidden to be the middleman, and to go between and to start telling somebody else some negative information which they have said about you. So I couldn't go and say, "I've heard this negative information about you. No, I've heard this conversation that took place. This is what they're saying about you." That's called rechilus, and that's also forbidden. Now, on that point, I just want to bring up, I know I've sent to some of you before an article which I wrote with regards to cluster B personality disorder, and I want to, I think I will in more detail in another course, please God, go into it into a lot more detail. But just to know that if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone is relating information to you about somebody else, it's a big red flag to look out for. So if someone says to you that so-and-so is angry with you because you've done X, Y, and Z, now the term for that, they normally call that is a flying monkey. They're actually acting as an agent for the person who's trying to control or manipulate you, and they kind of sowing a seed of hatred or doubt, and they're using this agent. This person who's speaking to you is actually an agent for someone else. And so if you ever hear that, just as a suggestion, a very practical and useful piece of advice, if someone ever says to you, "Do you know what so-and-so is saying about you?" Stop it right there and say to that person, if someone has a problem with me, let them approach me themselves. Never get yourself into that situation where you're caught up with somebody else's argument. It's very often how situations are orchestrated. So if you ever hear that, apart from being forbidden in Torah law, it's a very big red flag to know that something much more nefarious is happening. So cut it right there and then, and say if someone has something to say something about me, they should direct it to me themselves. Never be the middleman in between. And that's what's called rechilus. There's a third kind of forbidden speech, and this is probably obvious, although it is spoken in halacha, but it's much more severe. And that's what we call moitzi shem ra. And that's in Hebrew, right? Moitzi is to expel, shem ra, a bad name. Now, that is when a person starts spreading gossip, literally non-factual information which is not factual. People are speaking about you things which are negative and are simply not true. That's actually lying about you and defaming your character and slandering you. That is, again, forbidden in the Torah. Right? It would be forbidden to say things which are false about somebody else. Okay, and so that obviously, I think we relate to that a lot. Now, what's important to know in halacha is that it's not just forbidden to be the recipient of this information. So it's forbidden to speak this information. So you're not allowed to say lashon hara, you're not allowed to listen to lashon hara. And the same is true no matter what format it takes place in. Okay, so whether it be in written communication, whether it be on the phone or through a message, right? All of that is forbidden, right? And the consequences can be detrimental. Right? A person who does and engages in such a practice can literally cause havoc in somebody's life. And it happened to me, just a couple of days ago. Someone, to go into details, in case it's not Lashon Hara if I don't say the name, but this happened to me where someone gathered information, personal information about me, which, spanning back almost 10 years. And they collected this and they sent it out into the public, that in an effort to try and slander me. Now, that obviously is forbidden from the Torah law, and the consequences are severe, right? So it's quite clear that it's forbidden to do something like that, because the damage which can be caused, right, can be catastrophic, right? And it can you don't know how far it can go, and that's something which there's a midrash which says a very powerful thing, and the midrash says, asks a question. The midrash says, what would you prefer? What's worse, if someone was to attack you with a knife, or if someone was to attack you with an arrow? Which would be the worst way to be hunted down? Which would be worse? Now, some people think a knife, some people think an arrow. So the Midrash says it's better to be attacked with someone wielding a knife than to be attacked by someone who shoots an arrow at you. Why is that? Because if someone comes at you with a knife, right, they could hold the knife up to you, and you may be able to negotiate with them. You could say to them, "No, don't stab me. Don't." And I've myself have been in a situation. I've had a cocked gun to my head, and through the words in the mouth, right? So you're able to manage to get out of the situation. So sometimes, if a person has a knife, if someone's about to attack him, so you can talk your way. You can try and negotiate. Don't kill me. Don't stab me. This, that, and maybe you can get out of the situation. But if a person shoots an arrow at you, or if a person shoots at you with a bullet, once he's pulled the trigger, the bullet's gone. Right? There's no turning back. There's no negotiation. Once the deed is done, it's gone. And that's the same is true with speech. Once speech has gone, we cannot retract it. And the minute we release it from our mouths, or the minute we press send, it's gone, right? And sometimes we can delete it, and and again, same thing happened to me a couple of days ago. I, by mistake, sent a message to the wrong people, and once it's sent, right? And even I recognize that it was a mistake. I tried to delete it. It was already read by I don't know how many people. So that's the important thing, is once we press send, once we speak something, there's no taking it back. You can't, and that's why a person has to constantly be careful what you say. And it's a challenge. And for me, it's also a challenge, something which we work on our whole lives, to refine your speech and to say things which are positive. And for me personally, it can be a challenge. I'm sure for anybody, right, to watch what you say and how you say it. Can always be something that we need to work on continuously. And that's basically the idea of Lashon Hara. Now, I just want to go through a couple of events in history which took place because of Lashon Hara, and then I want to go through a very interesting way to prevent and to guard yourself. So some of the famous events which took place because of Lashon Hara, it's written in my book, was the sin of Adam in the Garden of Eden. Right? The snake spoke Lashon Hara. The snake said to Eve, "No, why don't you eat from the tree?" Right? And he didn't say anything false, but he spoke Lashon Hara, and that caused the sin of Adam and Eve, which ultimately brought death into the world. The sale of Joseph, that also took place from Lashon Hara, which led to the slavery of the Jewish people in Egypt. Basically, the brothers were saying, their father, they felt jealous that the father was giving more attention. Yaakov was giving more attention to Joseph. Right? That was also through evil, bad Lashon Hara, which caused that. Another famous story is the wandering of the Jews in the desert for 40 years. We know the story of the spies. They went to go and look at the land of Israel, and they came back, and what did they do? They spoke Lashon Hara. They said that the land of Israel was going to be too dangerous. It was a bad place. Another tragic event in history was the story of Nov, the city of Kohanim, where thousands of people were killed based on, I think it was Doeg HaDoime, gave a false report, and he told King Saul that David was hiding out in the city, and Saul was quite temperamental, and Saul wanted to find David, and he's decided he's going to kill everyone until David comes out, and many innocent people died. And one of the more, one that we still feel to today is the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash was started because of Lashon Hara, right? And that's basically a very important thing. That one of the root causes of why we like to speak bad about others is normally seated in hatred. And if we don't like somebody, so it's going to be very hard not to speak negatively about them. And very often the way to cure and then to guard yourself from speaking Lashon Hara, instead of trying to watch your mouth, you got to watch your heart, to see how you feel. If you're feeling negative towards someone, the chances are that you're going to say negative things, either to them or to others. So it really starts in the heart, and what you say is usually just an expression of how you feel. Now, I want to deal with a question which comes up very often, and that is, am I allowed to speak to, let's say, a psychologist or to a lawyer? Now, very often, you're going to have to deal with personal information with, it's true, and that's negative. Am I allowed to go and speak, to these professionals? So the answer, says the Chafetz Chaim, is yes. And the reason for that is that it's contained, and it's not, your intention is not to do harm, and even as much as that, a person can, for example, can also tell a close friend, if something like this happens to you, you're allowed to share this information to the point where you can get it off your chest, because your intention isn't to be malicious. Your intention is to actually heal yourself through the advice and the counsel of others. So in that case, you may speak it, so long as your intentions are positive. Now, there's a lecturer, I refer to him quite often. His name's Dr. Henry Abramson, and he has a very, you may want to write this down. He has an acronym of how to remember what is allowed to say and what is not, how to guard yourself. So the acronym is the word silent, so SILENCE, right? And silence. And if you remember this word, silence, you can avoid most instances of Lashon Hara. So going to that example which we gave earlier, with the photographer Barbara, who's taking terrible pictures, and Adam comes to you and says, should I hire him for the wedding? So the first thing to do is S. What is S? Is search for alternatives to Lashon Hara, which means you don't have to say to Adam, Barbara is a terrible photographer. What you can do is you can say, I heard that, Susan is a much better photographer. Have you thought about taking Susan? So you can avoid speaking Lashon Hara altogether by speaking to about somebody else. So you can kind of divert the subject. So search for alternatives. So don't speak directly about Barbara. Say, try Susan. She might be better. So you can help Adam, but without having to speak Lashon Hara about Barbara. Okay, the next one is also very important, and that is I, and that's intend for a positive result, which means that a person should try and have in mind that it should be a positive outcome, or meaning that when you say to Adam, Barbara is not a good photographer, is your intention to hurt Barbara, or is your intention to help Adam, right? And that's a very big difference. When we speak, we have to be careful of what are we trying to do. Are we trying to hurt someone, or are we trying to help? And if we're trying to hurt somebody, right, so then that's negative. So if your intention is to do something for the good, your intention is to help Adam, so that would now make it more acceptable. Another thing, which is the L, and that is look for exonerating factors, which means you may have seen Barbara's photo set, and you can see that every one of those pictures are terrible, but you could maybe look for exonerating factors and say, you know what, maybe that day her camera wasn't working, you know, maybe she's actually is a great photographer, and try and find merit, you know, even though you've seen something that appears to be negative, try and find a way to excuse or make sense that that was the exception rather than the rule. Okay, the next one is the E, and that is exaggeration is forbidden. Okay, now it's forbidden to exaggerate. Even when you are allowed to say something negative about somebody else, so one is not allowed to exaggerate. You can't say, no, I've seen every one of Barbara's photos, she's a terrible photographer, and then start adding on more stuff. And not only is that, but she comes late, and she's, you know, and she's messed up in this wedding and that, and start adding information which you haven't seen. You can just say what you have seen and leave it simply as that. You can say to Adam, you know, I saw Barbara's photos, they were not good. And that's where it ends. You can't exaggerate or start blowing a story out of proportion. Okay, the next one is a bit of an extension to that. That's the N, and no hearsay is permitted, which means you cannot add onto the story. You can't say, I saw Barbara's photos that were terrible, and my friend Chaim also saw them. He thought they were terrible, and Shmerel thought they were terrible, and she was at another wedding, and that was also, you can't write all that. That is, again, it's hearsay. You haven't seen it for yourself. You don't know. So you're not allowed to relate and pass on that information. Okay, the next one is C, which is very, very important, and that is consequences should be proportionate, which means if you're going to say to someone relating this information, the consequences need to be proportionate. Now, let's say Barbara is about to win a career lifetime award for being the best photographer, and this is kind of her career move that's going to open the doors, you know, and going to set her, you know, on a path to have a whole career out of photography. And by you now speaking this, you're going to literally ruin her whole life. Then you're passing over that information. The consequences of what you're doing is far worse than saving Adam, you know, from his wedding, because you're going to ruin somebody else's life in the consequence. Right? So one should always measure up and weigh out. Is what I'm saying, is the consequences going to be equal and proportionate to what I'm giving over? If it's going to be far more severe by me saying over this information than what's needed, then one has to stop, and you're not allowed to say it, because the person's going to have a much more negative, you know, impact than what the information is actually about. And the last one, which is again a very important one, is the E, and that is engage with the person first. Okay, so that means if you see Barbara's photos are bad, right, before you start telling anybody else about those photos, and you know, and start spreading gossip and telling other people that Barbara's a terrible photographer, what you should do is go to Barbara and say to Barbara, I saw your pictures. Have you considered, you know, other career options? You know, are you sure that this is, you know, good for you? Right? I saw, you know, it's not so good. Engage with the person, because very often when doing that, you'll find out more information, and maybe you'll find out some of the truth. Barbara may say to you, oh, you saw those ones. Those were the worst ones. You know, these are the real ones. And you might see that she's actually a great photographer. So whenever you encounter something, it's always best to engage with the person themselves. And I think as a general rule, you know, if ever there's a conflict, better to engage one-on-one with the person to find out, you know, what's bothering them, what you've seen, and what seems to be bad before you start telling over to others. Usually the best approach is to be open and confront it, you know, head on. Right, so that's essentially, I'll leave it with the end. Right, so that's the laws of Lashon Hara. And just as a closing, right, so the sages say that God made the mouth has two gates, right, in the mouth. There's the teeth, and in front of the teeth is the lips. So before words can come out, it has to pass through your teeth, and then it has to pass through your lips. There's two filters. Now, we don't find that with other things. Eyelids, for example, there's just one eyelid. We blink, you know, open and close. But with mouth, there's two gates, which means you should always think twice before you speak. Right? Whenever a person's about to say something, just think to yourself, what am I saying? and is that something which is positive to be saying? Is it helpful, right? And if a person does that, right, we're all going to fall, we're all going to falter in this area, and it's normal and it's natural. But the main thing is to be sensitive to this concept and to continuously work on yourself to refine what you say to make it in a more positive and meaningful way. All right, so guys, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself. I'm happy to.
Yeah, Rabbi, I'm sorry that I sent all those 10 years of text messages forward to everybody.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Right, Lisa?
Okay.
Good.
My question is, if someone is saying Lashon Hara, why does the receiver of Lashon Hara even believe it?
Right. So according to the halacha, if someone does tell you lashon hara, it's forbidden to listen, and it's a person should actually not believe it. You should you should actually not accept it. So even though you've heard it, you should pretend that it's not true. So if you sometimes you're not able to not listen, but if you have heard it, you don't believe it. That's the standard.
But why do so many people believe it?
I think it's a flaw in kind of human nature, is that we like to hear negative things about others. Yeah. But,
I have a question. I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Okay. Listen to this scenario. An example. Okay. I have kids, right? I have kids. Let's say my son is going now with somebody that is not good, but that, we don't know, but everything that you can see from that person or the family is not really appealing, is not the same. And can I tell my son, okay, listen, I don't like the way they look. As a parent, as a parent, can I just advise for something? Let's say the guy or the girl were not, the best, and everybody, you hear things. Is an example, right? Can I tell my child, can I advise, don't go out with this person because I don't think it's good? Maybe the person is not that bad after all, but as a parent, to protect your children.
You want to tell them, Elicho them, yeah? So the answer is yes. Right? In a nutshell, you can. Okay. Whether it's going to be effective or not, it depends how you say it. But yes, of course, you can voice your opinion. And if there's certain things which you've noticed, which you are afraid of, or you've character traits which you are more than entitled to speak them out. I guess you have to again remember that rule of silence, having a positive intention, not thinking of the consequences, and not to exaggerate, etc., etc. So if you keep those rules in mind, and you keep to those guidelines, then for sure you can speak it up. There's no reason why not to. So you don't have to bottle it in. You're allowed to to say it over.
Well, yeah, of course, but as a parent, sometimes we want to protect our kids too much. We don't want them to mix, around there. So we, especially me, I will tend to, not say bad things, but I will talk more. I will be talking Lashon Hara.
So you could cross over into that. So it's you have to be careful not to exaggerate. Okay, and that's and sometimes we do that without even thinking. We would say and see something bad, and then we're going to start blowing it out of proportion. So you got to make sure that you have kind of the emotions in check, to know that you're not over exaggerating. And And in these situations, very often, even after you've spoken, it may or may not be effective. So you need to also weigh out whether it's going to be helpful or not. Very often, if you push in one direction, the other person may just deliberately want to push in the back. So sometimes we push too strongly in one direction, you might have the opposite result. So you have to again weigh it up.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else?
Come on, ask your questions. Go ahead, Hannah.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about the motivations that we might have sometimes when we want to speak or we speak certain things. And I'm just thinking about a work situation where, just very quickly in my situation, I had a partnership with people where the beginning, the intention was to work with their bigger organization. And when the journey continues, it turns out that they want to bring themselves in a different way. And I'm not sure if I should let the client know what's happening. And if I do that, when I think about my motivations, there's a lot of fear that I carry about them running away with our client, and also at the same time I'm annoyed. So in a way, there's a little bit of malice, I can tell, and be honest about it. I sort of want to sort of say, these are not the people I thought they are, but I'm feeling a little bit stuck. And so that's what I'd like to know, when you can see, should the client know, for example, if they ask why you said to us you're bringing this organization, but now we're seeing individuals, what's going on? In my answer, I might speak Lashon Hara, but I don't know how to deal with the situation.
Right. So I'll tell you a general rule, which is quite important, and that is with the Torah, when the Torah says something is forbidden or it's allowed, there's a principle which says, called darchei noyam, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant. Now, what that means is that when Hashem says you can or can't do something, it's actually to benefit us. Now, these rules, which we've learned today, now again, I will say to you the same thing. We've got to apply that rule of silence and go through each one of those characters, those 7, of the checklist, and see the intention, the exaggeration, the hearsay, etc., etc. And the reason for that is that if you don't go through that checklist and you speak Lashon Hara, it's not just that you're going to end up damaging yourself. Right? And so the keeping the Torah is almost a way to safeguard yourself. And when you keep it in the confines of the Torah law, you're almost living according to God's user manual. And it's almost like a safety net, a protection mechanism in how to conduct yourself. So if you've done something and it's allowed according to the Torah, you know that you've contained it. And it's not going to be overly emotional, to be curtailed, to be sensitive, to be accurate, and it will have, so you can express yourself. It will be through that channel that you've done it, and it will have a much more positive impact and a much more positive result. So you can vent that frustration and you can for sure speak about it. But if you do it through that channel, you know that it's going to be contained and it will have a positive outcome. Whereas if you just let rip, and vent all your feelings and frustrations, so that for sure it can backfire, it can have a negative consequence. So I think one needs to sit with the idea and look at the client and look at what one first thought, and to kind of weigh it all out. What really happened, what were your expectations, what should you go, and put the whole picture into context. And then, with having said that, formulate a set of words and statements which are particular to that. So you don't have to keep quiet. That's not what the Torah wants. But you just need to contain it so that it has a positive outcome for everyone. And it's almost, if you keep the Torah, it's almost guaranteed, that there'll be a positive benefit. That no one gets hurt doing a mitzvah. If you're doing something positive, right, you're doing something according to the will of Hashem, So you're not going to get hurt, even if it appears like that in the beginning. But you can have a guarantee you're doing the will of Hashem. You're not doing against the will, so that you come with a guarantee. So yeah, good. Hope that answers that. And Avichai.
Don had
Yeah.
a question
Someone
too.
says
We can go after.
Hilul Hashem or Hashem Yisrach. It's also part of Lashon Hara, correct?
Is someone Chilul Hashem? It may or may not be that we didn't discuss today, but there's many other types of forbidden speech, which is not allowed in the Torah. For example, a person can't lie in general, and a person can't make false oaths. A person can't bear false testimony. There's a number of other characteristics of speech. Chilul Hashem can be both in speech and in action as well. So, but yes, one who speaks Lashon Hara can. That's one of the things the Chafetz Chaim says, that depending on what it is that you say and who you say it to, you can definitely make a Chilul Hashem. So, for example, a person, let's say, gives a negative report, about someone that's, doing, let's say, serving Hashem, whatever it is, so it can cause a Chilul Hashem in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Donna, you had a question as well.
Yeah.
Donna, you gotta unmute yourself.
Okay, Donna. And then
Donna, unmute yourself, please. So you can ask me a question. I can't hear you.
Hi.
Hey.
Yes,
Okay.
in
Go ahead,
the
ask your question.
beginning, 70 speeches, 40 speeches, and the other one I forgot because I was interrupted.
Okay.
So, like, I was wondering the numbers. That's basically what I'm asking about. The categories.
All right. So there's
I have what?
There's three categories which we dealt with today. So the one was Lashon Hara, which the second was Rechilus, and the third one was Motzi Shemra. So Lashon Hara was just truthful.
And what category did that all three come out of?
So that falls under the general category of forbidden speech.
Oh, okay. I have a computer problem, so I'll probably be on my phone for a while. So.
Okay. Good. So I hope that answers your question. Good. And Lisa has another question. Yeah.
What if someone is doing bad business and you know that they're doing things that are unethical? Can you let a person know if they want to do business with them that this is not the right person to do business with? Like if you really know for a fact.
Yeah. So again, if we follow those 7 categories, that's the rule of silence. Then, yes, you can inform someone. Again, it has to be within the context with a positive intention. But yes, you can. There's a rule which we call to'eles. To'eles means that there's a purpose or positive outcome. And so if you know someone's unethical in business and that person's going to get harmed if you don't inform them beforehand, so you may, in fact, tell them. So, and the same would be, it often happens with like shidduchim and things like that, where someone is, you might marry somebody, and they've got some kind of flaw or fault that had they known about it, they wouldn't want to proceed. So you may inform the person, but again, it has to be within those 7 parameters that we discussed.
Okay.
Now, if it falls outside of it, it will be Lashon Hara. And one of the biggest things is that the consequences are not bigger than the information given. So if that's going to, let's say, cause unnecessary harm, to the person, someone has to make sure that you weigh it up.
Okay.
But, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. And then Avichai? Yeah, you want to unmute this?
In the group, the book, the Sefer, it's a good read for people to actually answer a tremendous amount of questions. And some areas I think would still be a little bit tricky. So you can ask the rabbi or myself as well. Short hair as well. This is We don't care. The smaller
Yeah,
version will have bigger sizes.
so Uzi, if you can hold that book up, I just want to make a little. If everyone can see that picture, that picture is not actually the Chafetz Chaim. So they say that is the butcher of Radin. that was the Chafetz Chaim was only photographed twice in his life. The one was for a passport photo, and the other one was in 1928 at the Gudas Yisrael convention, where he was caught on film, and when he was filmed, he ran away from the camera. He didn't actually want to ever have a photo taken. So that portrait, which was there, was just a person who looked quite kind of holy, and that they say that's purported to be the butcher of.
Here's one area that I'm actually open to it, that actually is kind of relevant to a question that was asked earlier, and it says that at times the prohibition of Lashon Hara can be relevant, even when speaking about a child. For example, if someone says something derogatory about an orphan child who is being raised by another family, and his remarks are liable to cause the family to send the child away from the house, then the speaker's words are considered Lashon Hara. The same halacha applies to any other scenario in which the speaker's words could cause a child's damage or distress. Regarding this, speaking derogatory about the child, when the information is common knowledge, it gives you the different sections of recholos and halachas on this. If one's intent in speaking negatively about a child is in order to prevent the child from causing damage or to guide the child to the right direction, then it is permitted. Nevertheless, one must be sure from the outset that the information he wants to let is true. He is not in a hurry to rely on information that he heard from others. As well as explaining the sections, once people get the book, it will give you different sections to help a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's definitely a book it's worth reading. The book of Shmir Salashin and the Chafetz Chaim. So I think it is available in English. It's been translated quite a number of times. There's some very good copies out there. So I know that it's a good idea. There's the different programs. If a person wants to do it, we do a page a day, and you can cover the entire book over. I think it's a 2-year period where you can learn 1 page a day or 2 laws a day. So there are things like that, and it's definitely something which helps to gather in and learn that information. So Roxanne, I think that helps also with Uzi read, helps in your situation.
No, the question was just simple. Concerning they're asking about something, jobs and things like that. To give my opinion on something, concerning jobs or, anything like personal, that will be Lashon Hara? Saying what I feel.
No. So again, if your intention is to guide your child and to give them, to guide them in the right way in life, so you're allowed to say. Okay, so again, just think twice when you speak.
Right. That is exactly what I was writing. All this the silence thing, and at the end, the think twice. I think is
So that's kind of the golden rule. Obviously there's laws to learn, and there's actually hundreds of laws, and you can get bogged down and overly complicated, in it. But this rule of the 7 categories, is if you keep to that, it kind of incorporates all 300 laws. So it's a very useful tool.
Can you say a little bit more about the engage one? Because I'm thinking about what Roxana shared, that if you have a son and you're not sure about the company they're keeping, I mean, isn't there a little bit of a good thing to consider if we look at the engaged with the person directly to check ourselves if perhaps we're not just and I'm not saying this is the case, perhaps just prejudiced and with a good heart reach out to that young lady or young man involved in my child's life and engage with them personally so that I can have a chance to filter my thoughts about them and see, rather than perhaps rely on whatever I've heard or what the community that person comes from is understood to be, etc. Would that be something, or what I'm really asking is this engaging with the person directly, how far can we go? For example, in my example as well, I just had a thought while you were explaining my question, and I'm grateful that maybe I should speak to these people and be open with them and say, I was disappointed about how things evolved, and this is how I'm feeling. It's not easy to do that, but can you say a little bit about engaging with the person directly? Thank you.
So maybe use some theoretical names. Let's say the person's name is Martin. So let's say one approaches this person, and the best way is to often one needs to engage, and very often you'll have misconceptions, and without engaging with the person, you don't really know. A lot of it's just thought that you have in your own mind and assumptions which you thought which may or may not be true. When you engage with someone, you get the opportunity to ask them firsthand, why did you do X? What was your intention behind Y? And when you have all that information, you have a much broader and clearer picture. Whereas if you're just reacting, so I always say, your response is your responsibility. So try and get to a position where you're responding and not reacting. And that's very often what happens. When we get into these situations, we often trigger to react as opposed to responding. Now, reaction means that we're snapping off. We got triggered, we feel emotional, we feel sent, and then we start shooting up reactions. Now, you don't want to be in that position where you're reacting. You want to be in a position where you've given it some thought and you're actually responding. And I think that's really the space to get to. So engaging with someone allows you to gather information to actually formulate a response, as opposed to just reacting. I'm upset, I'm now going to do this, I'm going to get angry, I'm going to feel this, I'm going to do that. So the engaging part, I think, is a very important, and you need to engage all the stakeholders. It's important. Everyone that's involved in the process, needs to be considered. You need to speak to each person, and in a situation as this with a child, your son or daughter has met someone or seeing a company that you don't like, try and get to know those people. Who are those people, and what is it about your son or daughter that's actually drawing them to that person? What is it? And find out. The more you know, the better informed you are, and the better your response will be, as opposed to reactions.
But for example, if it's a different religion, right? And you go like, no, I don't accept this. Is that, I mean, because even if you approach the person, is you will not get anything out, because it's something that, is not culture or anything. It's just something for me more important.
Right. So again,
I don't want to. I don't want them to say, "Oh, you're mean," because no, it's not mean. It's just that I want to keep something. I don't want to, just go there and do like.
So I think that comes down to the main principle about having a positive intention, and that is, remember, going back to what we said in the beginning, we can build people up with words and we can break them to pieces. So if you have a positive intention, and you say, these are my values and these are my beliefs, which I don't want to compromise on, and you're free to choose and have your own values and beliefs, but it's not going to work for me, you'll have a much more positive outcome than going in with a negative attitude or a negative mindset. So I think the conversation is very important. I think sometimes we can do a lot of talking, but not a lot of communicating. And that means is that communication actually means understanding another person, not just saying words, but understanding what somebody else is thinking and feeling. And if we do that, I think usually, for the most part, it leads to better and more stronger relationships. Even if that person is from a different background, they will understand you and you understand them. And to leave with a more holistic, positive outcome. It doesn't have to be negative in its consequence. Abichai, I think you've been waiting for a question. No, you good?
I'm good. I asked the question of the Hilul Hashem.
Okay.
When someone's speaking, though, only when someone's speaking.
Right. Okay. Good. All right. Anyone else?
If I may
I have a question.
back on this just for a moment. So one of the things that is very clear in the Proverbs is just it's best for us to speak less. The less we speak, the better we are. And the reason why Solomon was saying this is because we wanted to draw words with wisdom. The words have to have the most impact and not the most damage. And that's why it's very, the way your words and your speech is, the uplift and the positivity, it could be in such a positive way that just the smallest amount of words you say, even if it's 3 words or 4 words or a sentence, that will change that person's life and perspective. That's why we have to be very minimum in that your lashon, your tone, your speech has to be holy in every aspect of the way. And, you know, lashon hara is like one of the biggest things that is taken for granted by a lot of people. And it's also taught that when a person speaks evil on any person or anything in particular, especially yourself, for instance, we do the Shana on ourselves the worst versus other people. So in order to correct that, you have to correct it in yourself first. And when you correct that in yourself first, then everything will come to be. And there are some other single teachings about the Shana that every judgment falls upon a person because of the evil speech. And so this is why you're very careful what you speak, and you also listen to the interview. Okay, anyone else?
Good. I have one last question. I think Bracha had a question.
Yes, I have a question. So, really quick, does Lashon Hara only apply to talking about other people, or also like businesses or like places, cities, things like that?
Yeah, good question. Anything which you can speak Lashon Hara about a group of people. One of the prime examples of that was, or even a city. So, for example, with the spies that went to report on the land of Israel when they, in the times of Moses, they were talking Lashon Hara about the land of Israel. So here's the prime example that answers your question, that they were speaking negatively about a land, and that's what they're punished for. So yes, you can speak. It's not just people. It can be a company, which is a group of people, or even a ethnicity, or even something that can be. It's usually the further away it is from a person, the smaller it is. It's mainly applies to people, but it can, under certain circumstances, apply to inanimate objects as well.
Thank you.
Good. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to message me. All right, and please get. I'll refer to the answer. Or
All right. So thanks, guys.
thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you very much.
And this is a huge subject, so don't be afraid to ask a question about this.
Thank you.
It's very
Todorama.
important that each of us get this done.
Thanks very much. Have a good week.
All right, guys.
Successful week.
Bye.
Smile, smile. Pray for each other.
Share time, everybody.
Robert loves it when he's sleeping. You guys can call him. Just kidding. Yeah, I do it again. Oh.